Yes, that was our first roll call of the year. Good morning, this is the House Appropriations Committee at Friday, January 3rd, 2026, just after 10 o'clock. And we have our first roll call for the session. So we're back with Emily and Andrew to talk about the child care closeout process. Right, and I know you had a presentation to one of you does, or both.
Yes, I've got a PowerPoint to try to walk through.
Okay.
But I don't know if you had any more, no, you had to leave pretty quickly while you were walking upstairs. Thought of any questions or anything else for Andrew, just on this, sort of setting the stage as to why we have to adopt this language because of the way that, because of the mechanics on how the revenue is collected and deposited.
Okay, good.
Okay, haven't done many payroll, both manual and payroll agencies. Let me see if I can summarize this. You have 4 payments. First one did not start with the first month of the quarter.
So it
For the first
depends.
year.
Certain businesses pay on a weekly basis. They're like really big businesses. They're required. It depends on the amount of revenue that they're remitting on behalf of employees. But so the issue is not with the payments, but when the returns come in. So when the payments come in, we don't know what part of that is for withholding and what part of that is for child care contribution.
Right.
When we get the return, we get the data. And once we get that return, we have that data and it gets transferred automatically.
Okay, the return is from the employer or from the employee.
The employer.
Their quarterly things they send in,
For
or
withholding,
weekly or
yeah.
whatever it is. Okay, with their
Quarterly.
payments.
Quarterly withholding returns.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So your first quarter was kind of not quite, it started in August, if I recall, for the first year. October, right?
So, okay, so the
Oh.
first year it started on July 1, which meant that, so it started on July 1, which meant we didn't get a return in July. So there were there
2 months.
or you don't get payments. There's
September.
payments are down that first quarter
Yeah.
because it started on July 1 and you're not getting like payments at the beginning of that month based on past year activity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand how that works. But my understanding is the CCC started in August, so you had a smaller amount that quarter anyway.
I don't remember off the top of my head. I thought it was July 1 start date.
Well, it might have been, but I thought it was, they really didn't start withholding until August and September. That was what I recall.
Okay,
I may
that
be
makes
wrong.
sense because you withhold on past activity.
Right, so the first report in would have been in October.
Yes.
And the next one in January, so you were gonna be.
And then, so we
And
got
then the
those.
last one is really in July, and that's a new fiscal year, so you're talking from October to July 1.
Yeah,
But the
so
payments in July are for April through June.
yes, yeah,
Okay.
that's right, that's right.
So you have to reconcile that whole stuff and put it into the previous year. And then we started on a normal full year. I mean, the part of the problem is that people weren't sure how much was gonna actually, the projections on revenue was not really accurate by December. The projections on usage or utilization was the lagging, or it wasn't really accurate. And we were told it would take like 18 months to kind of get a picture of how this would work out in terms of revenue and usage and utilization.
Yeah,
So you
I-
have that now.
Mhm.
Now you're trying to go, and so you have the first year, which I believe is 24, 25.
Fiscal 25.
Yeah, and now we're in the second year. Is that correct? Is all that done?
that's generally correct. The fundamental issue that JFO, Finance and Management and the tax department have been working to resolve is that last return that comes in July is for payments in April, May, and June. And so those payments, that money is sitting in the general fund, but it's owed to the child care special fund.
Right.
And there are statutorily required transfers from the general fund. If they're, I defer to finance management and JFO on this part, but if that money doesn't get shifted over to the child care special fund, it gets transferred out of the general fund and it's not there anymore. And so other funds are getting that child care contribution money that in statute is supposed to go to the child care special fund.
Right.
So what Emily is going to explain is a process at the end of the year to estimate that amount so that we don't have an issue with childcare special funds getting transferred out of the general fund to other funds that aren't supposed to have them.
Okay, because there's, first of all, you have withholding on C-101 for your unemployment. You have a 940 and a 941 that you use for your state and federal withholding, for social security.
That's for federal.
Yes, and then you have the WHT form probably for your state.
And that's where the childcare contribution is
Yeah,
reported.
so it doesn't have its own form.
No.
It's still part of the regular employee withholding on the W-2.
Right, we did that because that's a required form that all employers are already using. So to just add a line there made it a lot easier on them, which made complying with the law a lot easier for them rather than creating yet another form.
Right, but it creates
It creates this issue.
this issue.
This issue in the general fund, right? And like the issue with why this language is necessary is just timely closure of the general fund, right? So there's this timing issue where the tax department can't do its reconciliation until it gets the return on the 25th, which like they don't get the return and then it's a, automatic thing. Their work, I'm assuming.
A lot of it is
automatic.
but some of it is not.
Is not, right? And we want to get the right money in the right bucket. So this is a way to make sure that finance and management can close the general fund timely and to outline a process to reconcile, once the tax department has their information and they've fully reconciled, for then finance and management to go back and fully reconcile what went into each fund.
Because if you really, if people are paying for a childcare fund, the money needs to go into the childcare fund. And that's to make sure it goes there and it doesn't go to some other fund or just get lost in the ether of general fund money.
Correct.
So it needs to go. So I have Wayne and then John.
Basically, just a comment, I was always worried about commingling funds anyway, you're already discussing with the ramifications of the problem, so. I was also concerned about more about it, but I'll talk when we get into the budget and we have people coming in from childcare. I'll ask them further questions about the utilization of that money, whether it's tax rate was at the proper level and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's kind of a different issue than what we're talking about right now. This is just a closeout process. John?
So this consensus estimate will provide you what you need here, so we don't have a shortfall later on.
Yeah, and it's
Fiscal year basically, right?
Yeah, it's really, we'll have an analyst in our department and an analyst at JFO come to a consensus revenue estimate, which after a couple of years of this, I think is going to be pretty darn accurate.
Pretty accurate.
Yeah, and you'll have the previous 3 quarters as well. So, and then that'll finance and management, I believe, will actually execute.
Yeah, they execute. Well, and this is what we did this year, and I'll walk through what happened this year because this language didn't exist, but we got to July and went, uh-oh, we got to deal with this. And this just codifies the process basically that we went through. And JFO worked with tax and finance to come up with this process.
That'll provide you enough accuracy.
Yeah. Right, and moving forward, we'll have to do this process this year and probably next year, that our hope with the tax department is moving forward. In January 2027, we're looking to implement finish implementation of a version upgrade of our system. And one small part of that, it's a really big project, but one small part of that is for withholding payments and I want to be clear on this. We're talking about a quarter of the payments, right? 3/4 we already have, it's the final quarter. And of that quarter, 99% of those payments in that final quarter come in electronically. And what we're going to do is make it so that those employers can pay childcare contribution and withholding separately. And so that money will go into the funds at that time. The one disclaimer that I need to give is it's going to require some serious outreach and education. So it's probably going to take like 6 months for us to bring, businesses into compliance with this. And the return is ultimately the guiding legal document. So if somebody makes a mistake on these payments, when we get the return, it'll automatically true up.
Correct.
But if we're able to get, 3/4 in accurately and then 99% of them paid in the childcare and general fund pretty darn accurately, it should, 3 years from now, alleviate the need to do this estimation process. That's our aim.
But in the meantime,
Anytime.
we have this fun language that I'll walk through. Share my screen. Hopefully this will all make sense. we're done. Okay. Here we go. So this is our, so going over the year-end closeout language, this is our normal disclaimer. We're not making policy recommendations, just providing information. So we'll go over the proposed BAA language regarding the closeout of the general fund and the child care contribution special fund. We'll go through the current state. Again, we've sort of talked about this already, but just it helps to hear it probably more than once. And then what the new language does specifically. So before getting into that, we've talked about this a lot in this committee, but as a reminder, right, in statute, there's a specific set of steps that occur when revenue comes in over and above the what's budgeted or what's anticipated. So the first thing is we follow 32 BSA 308, which is the first thing that happens is we fill up the general fund stabilization reserve to 5% prior year appropriations. That's always the first thing that happens when the general fund is closed. And we budget for this. We assume that we're going to need some money in every fiscal year to put into the stabilization reserve. And then the next step is 32 BSA 308C, which is that anything after we fill up the stabilization reserve gets split between the rainy day reserve. So this is 15% going to the balance reserve, the rainy day fund, and then 25%. Versus here, so we can help you when I get this wrong. 25% to the state employees retirement fund and 25% to the teachers retirement fund. And so that's what would currently happen with anything in the general fund. So in fiscal 2025, Department of Finance and Management and the JFO and the Department of Taxes worked together to estimate the amount of the payroll tax that was collected in the fourth quarter. Because what happened, right? So those payroll tax receipts are coming in with withholding, they're being deposited into the general fund. When finance management went to close the general fund, they said, oh, we've got all this payroll tax money that hasn't been transferred out yet. And we don't know how much to transfer out. And finance and management, rightfully, I think said, and we shouldn't be the only one making the estimate of how much to transfer out. So let's work with tax and JFO to come up with an amount that should be transferred out of the special fund. Otherwise, it would have been subject to that sort of year-end closeout process that's in statute. So what we did in FY25 is the three entities worked together to establish the amount that was collected in the fourth quarter. They were then reserved in the general fund. So we sort of held them and set them aside, sort of fenced them off, and then closed the general fund, kind of keeping those funds where we didn't know which fund they went into from being subject to going to the stabilization reserve and the pensions and the rainy day fund, because it was rightfully should have been part of the child care fund. So then once the fund was closed, the general fund was closed, all of those statutory allocations happened, finance and management unreserved those child care contribution special funds that we had estimated was rightfully part of the, should have gone to that special fund. And then transfer them over to the child care contribution special fund. So that sort of was the mechanism to protect those funds that by statute should have been in the child care contribution special fund and not have them go into those trust funds. So the way that that looked was first close the stabilization reserve. That's the first thing you got to do. Then executed the contingent transfer list. So this complicates it a little. So there was also all of these contingent appropriations that were in session law last year, right? So reserving money to be carried forward into the next year. We walked through this last week. And then everything else went to the bottom line. So first we reserved those childcare funds, did all of these, and then unreserved them and moved them to the childcare fund. So what the BAA language does is codifies this process for finance and management. So, right, like when finance and management got to year end, they were like, we don't have explicit instructions from the General Assembly on how to deal with this. We, you know, in working with JFO and the tax department, we were all comfortable moving forward with that, but it makes everybody, if there's an actual explicit process on what to do, that makes everybody more comfortable. It's good, you know, for an audit process, if anybody questioned why they did that, this language will exist to make it clear. So what this will do is ensure that we can still close the general fund timely, right? As opposed to waiting later into August to do it. And then and ensures that the child care contribution special fund gets all of the money that it's supposed to get for statute. So I'm gonna walk through each chunk of the language. There's 5 sections of this language.
We have to say a lot of words to do that thing.
Yeah. So we worked with the finance management and tax department and the fiscal office worked on this language. Like right after it happened, we all said we need language. So we all worked together to come up with this language. We have back in July, and when we revisited it in January, there are a few technical tweaks that Grady will bring in, but for the most part, the process is the same. So at the end of the fiscal year, no later than the close of the first week, tax and finance and joint fiscal will tell finance and management what we anticipate the fourth quarter receipts for the child care contribution will be. That's currently sitting in the general fund. So we'll come up with a number that we think is for the child care contribution special fund. And so then finance and management will take that amount and they're going to reserve it sort of in a temporary space in the general fund. And then execute the remaining requirements of general fund closeout. So for this purpose, in current law, the only other thing that happens, so first you do the stabilization reserve and then the next step, the money to the pension and the rainy day fund, the teacher's pension. So they're going to reserve it and then finish closing out the general fund. So and then once that closeout process is done, now it's possible, I should interject in this part. This is what's in statute. It's impossible, and frequently in the last bunch of budgets, the General Assembly has inserted language in the budget that says, in between those steps, do some other things, like the contingent appropriations or reserve money for other things. But for the purposes of what needs to go into statute, it'll reflect what's always in statute, and then the session law will deal with if you want to do something different at closeout. So then once the finance and management has closed the general fund, they'll immediately unreserve that amount that was set aside, that fourth quarter child care contribution payment, and then transfer it to the child care special fund.
This is the unreserved step.
Yeah.
And then there's the
Unreserved.
transfer step.
Yep. And then sections D and E are actually a sort of true up place. So that's one of the tweaks that we have is it doesn't explicitly say transfer. So we're going to add, some explicit language that says transfer. But so it's possible the JFO, it's highly likely that JFO and the tax department will not perfectly estimate the amount of the child care contribution fund. We were very close, I think, this year. As Andrew said, as more data comes in and more years of experience, we'll get better and better at estimating that. But chances are we won't get it to the dollar. So when that happens, once the tax department has fully reconciled the returns, we'll then know what the actual amount should have been. So if the amount, I have to reread this again. If the amount unreserved and transferred to the special fund is greater than that should have been, then the excess. So we transfer the actual amount. If there's excess, then we're going to reserve it in accordance with the way it should have been reserved because it's really general fund.
The rainy day fund.
The rainy day fund.
Stabilization, yeah,
Right,
okay.
so it's-
Okay.
We reserve too much, then anything that's left over that's not payroll tax,
You take out.
we follow the general fund closeout statute because that's what it should have done anyway. If it happens in the other direction, if we don't reserve enough and there's more general fund that's owed back to the child care special fund, this proposes to unreserve it from the general fund balance reserve, so the rainy day fund, take it out of the rainy day fund and move it all over.
It's
Now,
not the stabilization reserve. This is the sort of the second.
correct, the second reserve. What this doesn't do is take the money, like if we I don't want to say accidentally, if our estimates are, in the direction that means that we put too much into the general fund statutory closeout language, which includes the pensions.
Yeah.
This does not reach back into the pension funds and pull out the money that shouldn't have gone to the pensions. It leaves it in the pensions.
Yeah.
Because that's a whole other complicated sets of statutes that we would have to untangle
Yeah.
and line. So it leaves it in the pension, just takes it all out of the rainy day.
Yeah.
Right. And then puts it in the child care contribution special fund to make that whole.
So when you had to guess this year, how much were you off? Were you talking about thousands, tens of thousands, millions, I'm being exaggerated, but what sort of was the range of how far you were off? Just so we have a sense of the scope of this.
While I was walking over here, I was afraid you were gonna ask me that question. I was walking over here, I was thinking, question I can't answer, what actually happened, so I will find out. But I don't think.
Just curious, I don't think it was a lot, and that's what I want people to understand, is that we're not talking about big numbers here.
Yeah,
That's why I would like to know. It's just a range of whatever.
yes, it wasn't millions, it wasn't. And I think, right, like it's in that balancing, like how do we collect this money that that makes it simple and seamless for employers and make sure that the funds where the money is intended to go to ends up there. Anyway, so that's the 5 sections that are in the budget. This is what it's doing. So this is just another picture of it, right? So the steps would be for the proposal in the budget adjustment. First and foremost, before anything else happens, fill up the stabilization reserve. Then reserve the estimated amount owed to the child care contribution special fund. It'll be that consensus estimate between tax and JFO. Once that money is reserved, then follow the process of 308C, rainy day fund, general fund balance reserve, et cetera. Unreserve the amount that was reserved for the child care contribution special fund. And then do this reconciliation process. So determine whether or not it was too much or not enough, and then move the amount that's owed to the child care contribution special fund. Now that's the proposal in the BA, and that sort of changes current law.
And that becomes, statutory law.
That becomes a statutory process. Now, in the budget adjustment, the governor proposed a process to deal with almost $75 million worth of unallocated funds at the end of FY26 to carry forward into FY27, which is similar to upgrade contingency language that often happens either in the budget process or in the budget adjustment process, that depending on how revenues are tracking or how you want to deal with unallocated balances in the current year and how they interact with next year is when we have these sort of session law changes. Last year, it was carry forward money to be utilized in the FY26 budget and reserve the 50 million for Secretary of Admin to transfer by the e-board, and the two $30 million reserves. Those kind of got stuck in between the two statutory processes.
Right.
So that has happened again in the budget adjustment. So the last slide was the statutory changes. This is what's being proposed in the budget adjustment. So again, step 1 doesn't change. Fill up the 5% stabilization reserve first and foremost. These comments are funny. Okay. Step 2 is then reserve $74.9 million year-end general fund balance by property tax increases in FY27. That will be the governor's recommendation is that step 2. Step 3 is then reserve the amount owed to the child care contribution special fund. Then we follow the 4th step, which is anything that's left after that, reserve in the rainy day fund and send funds to the pensions. Then we would unreserve the child care contribution special fund amount and then do that reconciliation process and make sure that the correct amount gets to the child care contribution special fund.
So the governor's proposal, insert step 2, the rest of it would otherwise be the normal order.
Yes, correct. Now, while JFO was reviewing this, I think one question for the committee is, do you think the $74 million should happen before the reserve for the child care contribution special fund or after?
So if this happens before, that is committing that amount of general fund to something else. And then what happens if there isn't enough general fund to fill the childcare? And the people have paid their taxes to fill the childcare.
Correct. So if that happens,
Yes.
right, then we wouldn't be able to reserve the full amount that's owed to the child care contribution special fund. Right, first it would go to FY27 for property tax buy down. And then if there wasn't enough child care contribution special fund enough in the general fund to reserve that full amount,
Right,
then you would either have to unreserve it from the rainy day fund or deal with it in the budget adjustment process. So in the governor's language, it's explicit that like notwithstanding both 308C
yeah,
and its new language is gonna be 308D. It's explicit that both those two sections come in after the 75 million.
that's the proposal.
That's the proposal. You could strike the notwithstanding of the you could put the childcare fund before
Right,
75.
right. We could make that step 6 instead of step 2.
I would defer purely to finance management.
Yeah.
I'm not asking you, I'm just looking mechanically, and then I know I have some questions.
It wouldn't be step 6, it would be flipping step 2 and step 3. So you would reserve.
Oh, yes, that's
rainy day
right.
fund,
Got it.
childcare money,
Okay,
and you know.
I was
up
putting it
to this
later, but-
amount Goes to next year.
Okay.
And then do the,
Right.
childcare.
okay. Wayne and then Lynn.
When will we know whether or not the full amount brought in each year will be actually used for childcare? So when will we know in the new budget session, will have numbers that come in to give us a picture of how much would be used, and as opposed to how much revenue is actually in that fund?
Well, that would be a better question for DCF oversees that fund. That'd be a better question for them in terms of what the cash flows look like, because their money's being transferred into that fund throughout the year, but they're making expenditures throughout the year. And in terms of how they're administering those programs, that's going to impact when the expenditures are going out.
Remember, there was a lot of churn before, and they were hoping to increase the number of childcares. If they don't, this fund may just keep rising, not be used.
Lynn?
Yeah, I just want to go over the mechanics of this. So number one step is the employer pays their employee to withhold some taxes, both for their state taxes and for the CCC. That's on their W-2, that will end up on the W-2. Then they send the money to the state, which then goes into your regular state withholding fund, wherever that is. Then you go, in the last quarter, you fence off that total withholding fund. You fence off that last quarter in the general fund, so you can figure out what's gonna go to CCC and what's gonna go to regular withholding. General fund.
Yeah, withholding goes to the general fund as part of personal income tax.
Yes, yes,
And
but that, you fence that piece off, you know what that amount is, when you get to withholding it.
Yeah, we just don't know what part of that.
Is the CCC. Yeah, so you fence that off so that you can do the reconciliation for the closing out the fund. So then you close out the general fund, which is done by F&M, with this fenced off area over here. And then, now the way I have it here is that then after that closeout is done, without that fenced in amount of money for the fourth quarter, then you can go and figure out then you can take your closeout money without that fenced in. You can give it to stabilization, rainy day fund, all those different categories. And then you can go and look at the fourth quarter and make an estimate based on a lot of things to figure out what is the CCC and what is the regular withholding. That goes into the general fund. And then if there's not enough, you can hit the rainy day fund and pull some of it out of that, or if it's too much, you put that then back into your fund, say with it. Or what do you do if you just make
If it was
transfer from the general fund?
too much, it would go back to it would follow 308C, so the rainy day fund and the pensions.
So it would go back to that, okay.
And I just want to clarify one thing. The amount that gets fenced off is not the full fourth quarter withholding amount. It would be the estimated component of that amount that would have been payroll tax for the child care stuff.
So they're trying to figure out if it's based on which quarter you see from the first quarter plus your history. If they're
Correct, yeah. So we would be trying to we're just gonna take that component, right? Because the rest of the withholding, 98% or more is.
So you're gonna take the 1% or the 1.5% or whatever you think it is and just fence that off. The rest of it goes into the regular program.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
I
all
have,
on W-2, so you're gonna have employees and employer. Stuff to reconcile, to make sure they're all, that's how you estimate it.
So,
Yeah.
well, we'll probably estimate it based on what we've actually received in revenues for the
Right.
prior 3 quarters and compare that to the last year's.
But that should match your, we're not going
We're not using.
I mean, it's not.
It's not
Well,
really.
I
Yeah.
We're looking at payments to the door. And when they're reported, the tax department, the way that we get this is just on that WHT that quarter. That's what we're
And you
using
get that every quarter.
every quarter, yes. And the change for the future would be when you go to make a payment, V-Tax, it's just making a payment in the payment module. You can think of it as an electronic payment voucher. There will be a line for the CCC in addition to the.
Yeah.
Which in the past, we weren't able to do cleanly. Or currently, we're not able to do.
Okay, thank you.
John and Marty?
Sort of, so we probably talked about this last year here a little bit. What we anticipate that total amount to be over the full time span here, what you remind me with that?
JFO nailed it in the first year, like about 82 million, but that was not the consensus revenue forecast. The consensus revenue forecast number was like 9. You'd have to talk with the economist as to why that was different. Speak for
But
that.
JFO's recommended thought 82 million.
The fiscal note, I think, was 81, somewhere between 81 and 82 million. And it came, I had an analyst before just yesterday pull a full year, so it was calendar year 2025.
Yeah.
1 to 131 to
Yeah.
12/31/25, the total revenue collected was 81.8 million from John County. Pretty
Look at
good.
that fiscal note.
It's 10.
Sounds like they nailed it.
Yeah.
All right, way to go, Pat.
So when the phone was going off, finance management said we overestimated by 878,000. last year. Which for only having 3/4 worth of data.
5% or one.
Not having, yeah.
Yeah, it was a.
First, no history.
Right, exactly. That's pretty darn good.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Know that.
Marty?
In principle, I think it would make more sense to reserve the money for the childcare before we set off the 75 million, because the money is owed to the childcare fund by statute. But I think it's going to be a small amount that we really don't need to hassle over too much. I mean, I think it makes more sense because the money is owed to the childcare fund. So to reserve the consensus that we talked about, which is that small piece left from the fourth quarter. Then we have money left over. We follow through on the governor's request if that's what we decide to do. And then go through the rest of the reconciliation process. I mean, the rest of the reserve process, contingent process. But I think it's a small amount of money we're talking about here.
Sort of the principle of the thing, though.
Right, right.
Okay, and hi, Mike has joined us. We're talking about childcare and closeout. I don't know how much you've been able to hear, but I'll look for your raised hand if you have any questions.
Then you gotta hold.
Maybe so, but I haven't seen him on the screen. Yes, okay. So are there any other questions for Andrew and Emily? Is everyone getting sort of clearer in everybody's minds? A few more times, we'll really know what it means. I think the 5 little little boxes were really helpful at the end after going through all of it, to just kind of make it smaller, so. Thank you both very much. Andrew, I know we'll see you again.
Yeah.
27 is coming along, coming up soon. So thanks for coming in. I think we're running behind because we have a roll call. Are people okay if we continue with Brady in the language right now? If you need to take a break, you can step out but otherwise did it get darker in here?
Well, when you talk about money like this, it's always done.
You know what, I think it was the white screen of the presentation was all white and now it's not white. Do you want me to? Yes, go ahead. Let's go offline for a minute and then